A dimly lit booth. Whispered lies over wine. But what they didn't expect was me walking in alone, calm, and sitting at the next table. And when I turned to her, husband smiled and said, "I believe your wife is enjoying the lamb with mine." Everything changed. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's about a woman who chose silence over screaming, dignity over drama, and how one quiet dinner became the loudest revenge of her life. Eleanor Brooks wasn't the type of woman who snooped. After nearly 2 decades of marriage, she'd built what she believed to be an unshakable trust with Nathan. She'd always considered trust to be sacred, something that didn't require constant checking or questions. And for most of their marriage, that principle had held. Until that Tuesday night. The soft chime of a notification broke the stillness in their bedroom like a crack in glass. Nathan was in the shower. Eleanor had just finished grading a stack of her economics students' midterms and was sitting cross-legged on their bed, mindlessly scrolling through emails when his phone lit up on the dresser. It was nothing out of the ordinary at first, just a text preview. Just another message. Until she saw it. Reservation confirmed at Aria for Friday 8 p.m. Private booth. She'll be thrilled. Her heart didn't race, it froze. She stared at the screen for a full 10 seconds, waiting for her brain to come up with a logical explanation. A business dinner, a client event, anything that made this normal. But nothing came. She wasn't a suspicious person. She didn't believe in jumping to conclusions. But something deeper stirred inside her, something primal. Intuition, maybe. The kind that doesn't speak in words, but in sensation. The slow rising certainty that something is deeply wrong. That this moment, quiet as it is, marks the end of life as you knew it. Almost in a trance, Eleanor walked to the dresser and picked up his phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She hadn't needed his passcode in years, but her fingers moved instinctively. 826. Their wedding anniversary. Still his code. It opened without hesitation, and so did the abyss. That message about the dinner was only the beginning. There were more. Dozens. Weeks of messages, photos, inside jokes, flirtations, plans. So many plans. Not just for one night, but for weekends, trips, even apartments. An entire emotional ecosystem that had nothing to do with her. Her husband had a secret life, and she had just entered it uninvited. The woman's name was Sabrina. Sabrina Carter. Eleanor recognized it vaguely. Nathan had mentioned her once or twice in passing, some marketing manager at his firm. Younger, of course. Pretty from what she could tell in the pictures. Effortless in the way only women in their 30s seem to be. And married. There was even a photo of Sabrina with a man, her husband, no doubt posing in front of a modern downtown office. Architecture firm logo behind them. Successful, attractive, photogenic. The perfect couple. Just like Eleanor and Nathan had once been. She sat down on the edge of the bed, phone still in hand, breathing shallow and jagged. Her mouth was dry. Her hands were trembling. Her mind couldn't hold all the pieces, all the implications. The life she lived, the man she loved, it all suddenly felt fragile. Like something could just collapse under her and no one would catch her fall. 15 years. 15 years of shared history. Of inside jokes and holiday traditions. Of renovating this house together. Of late-night conversations and dreams of retirement in the Carolinas. And all of it had become background noise to whatever this was. From the bathroom, Nathan called out, "Elle, have you seen my blue tie?" His voice was light. Casual. Ordinary. Like he wasn't systematically dismantling their marriage one message at a time. Eleanor stood slowly, placed the phone exactly where it had been, and walked toward the closet. In the second drawer, she said, her voice calm and clear, belying the scream inside her chest. She lay awake that night next to him in silence. Nathan's breathing was steady, peaceful. Like nothing had changed. Like he hadn't just detonated the foundation of their life together. She stared at the ceiling and wondered if he could feel her rage beside him, the storm slowly building behind her composed expression. But she didn't confront him. Not that night. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because she already knew what he would say, what all men say when they're caught. It didn't mean anything. It was just a phase. "I still love you." Empty words made to preserve the illusion. Or maybe she didn't confront him because something deeper in her had woken up, something quiet and strong and calculating. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a shift. A tectonic crack in everything she thought was stable. But she wouldn't scream, she wouldn't beg, she wouldn't cry in front of him. Not yet. Instead, the next morning Eleanor moved like everything was normal. She made the bed, packed his lunch, kissed him on the cheek. Told him to have a good day at work, even though she knew exactly where his thoughts would drift come Friday night. When the door closed behind him, she stood in their sunlit kitchen, suddenly unfamiliar, and realized something that chilled her. He had grown this comfortable with lying because she had grown that predictable in trust. That hurt more than the affair. It wasn't about Sabrina, it wasn't even about sex. It was about all the quiet ways she had been erased from his life. The unanswered texts. The distracted glances. The sudden disinterest in their shared routines. The way he no longer remembered the kind of wine she liked or how she hated sleeping with the television on. Little by little, like dripping water over stone, he had carved her out of the picture. And she had let him. Because she was too busy holding everything else together, teaching, managing the house, caring for his mother during chemo, smiling at events he dragged her to, while he basked in praise. She'd been so determined to be the good wife, so committed to preserving the image of a perfect life that she hadn't noticed she was the only one still trying. But now she was done trying. She didn't know what she would do yet. Only that she wouldn't collapse. She wouldn't fall apart like he probably expected. Eleanor Brooks had built too much, survived too much, sacrificed too much. Whatever came next, it would not be tears. It would be something else. Something he wouldn't see coming. The day after the ping, Eleanor called in sick for the first time in 3 years. She wasn't sick in the traditional sense. But her body moved with a strange heaviness, her limbs foreign, her breath reluctant. Every part of her resisted returning to routine. Nothing about her life felt routine anymore. Instead, she sat at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee she didn't drink, Nathan's phone cradled in her palm like a grenade. She opened it again. She needed to see it all. Not just the message from the night before, but the whole story. The full picture. The version of her husband that had been living in the shadows. There were dozens of texts between Nathan and Sabrina, some flirtatious, others downright intimate. Photos of drinks clinking over candlelight, of shared desserts, of Sabrina in a satin robe taking a mirror selfie in what was clearly a hotel room. Nathan replied with a heart emoji and a caption. Still dreaming of last weekend. Eleanor's stomach turned. The timestamps were like little knives. Weekends he said he was at conferences, nights he claimed he was stuck late at the office. All lies. And somehow she had accepted every single one. But what broke her wasn't the flirtation. It was the familiarity. The comfort. The inside jokes. The long paragraphs about his frustrations at work, about feeling trapped in routine, about how Sabrina made him feel alive again. Alive. As if the life they'd built together had been a kind of sleep. She opened an email thread. Nathan had used his personal account. The subject line: beachfront apartment, second look. Attached were floor plans, rental agreements, and a note. Maybe this will be our spot when you're ready to leave him. Eleanor closed her eyes, resting her forehead on the cool granite countertop. She stayed like that for several minutes, trying to keep her breathing, even trying to not let the nausea win. When she opened her eyes again, she saw the photo on the fridge. The two of them in Italy 7 years ago, standing in front of the Trevi fountain. She remembered that trip. They'd fought over something stupid. Nathan hadn't liked the hotel she booked, but they had laughed about it later while sharing gelato. Back then, she thought their marriage was solid. She believed that love once established could endure friction. That the hard parts were just part of the story. Now she wasn't so sure. She clicked on one of the images of Sabrina and studied her. Blonde. Clear skin. That kind of effortless, dewy beauty that Eleanor had never possessed. She didn't wear much makeup, but her lashes were long and curled, her smile bright and unguarded. She looked like a woman who'd never once wondered if she was enough. And there beside her in so many photos was Nathan, laughing, glowing, affectionate in a way he hadn't been with Eleanor in years. Not because he couldn't be, but because somewhere along the way, he decided she didn't need to be chosen anymore. That she'd stay regardless. He wasn't wrong, she had stayed. through disappointments, through his mother's illness, through relocations and lonely holidays and silent dinners. And it wasn't because she was weak, it was because she had invested everything into this life. Everything. Eleanor stared at the blinking cursor of a new search bar and typed Sabrina Carter. It didn't take long to find her LinkedIn. Marketing director. Law firm, East Coast branch, married. She clicked through to a linked Instagram account. And there he was, Daniel Carter. Architect. Public speaker. Owner of one of the city's most sought-after firms. Tall. Confident. Distinguished. The kind of man who looked right at home in tailored jackets and with a whiskey glass in hand. In one post, Sabrina had tagged him with a caption, "My anchor in this stormy world." Eleanor almost laughed at the irony. So, she wasn't the only one being lied to. She sat back in her chair and stared out the window. It was raining lightly, the kind of misty rain that blurred edges and made the world look softer than it really was. But inside her, nothing felt soft. Instead, her thoughts wandered somewhere she hadn't visited in a long time. 15 years ago, she had been offered a research fellowship at the London School of Economics. A dream opportunity. But Nathan had just been promoted, and the timing, he'd said, couldn't have been worse. He didn't want a long-distance marriage. He needed her with him in Boston. So she said no. A few years later, he was offered a transfer to DC with a pay bump. She had just started making headway on a community outreach project at her university, one she'd poured her heart into. But he looked at her with those pleading eyes and said, "I can't do this without you." So she said yes. She'd said yes to him over and over. And not just to his career. To his moods. To his preferences. To the shape of their life together that somehow always bent in his direction. And now, she wasn't even a part of the story he was writing. She was just the woman he texted from the car saying he'd be late. The one who reminded him of his mother's birthday. The one who remembered to buy toothpaste and made sure the laundry was folded. She had become invisible. Eleanor pressed her hands together, fingers interlocked, and sat in the silence of her kitchen. Her mind was screaming, but outwardly she looked still. Stoic. She wasn't even angry. Not yet, just hollow. And beneath that hollowness, a question she hadn't let herself ask in years. What do I want? Not what Nathan wanted. Not what they needed as a couple. Not what made the most sense for their mortgage or their dinner plans or their next event. Just her. What did Eleanor want? She didn't know the answer yet. But for the first time in years, she intended to find out. Not for him. Not to win him back. Not to compete with Sabrina. But because she finally understood that the biggest betrayal hadn't just come from Nathan. It had come from herself each time she chose his comfort over her calling. Each time she dimmed herself to keep the peace. Each time she swallowed her disappointment and smiled through it, thinking that was love. That was over now. She closed Nathan's phone. Laid it gently back where she found it. And stood up straighter. She didn't know what she would do yet. But it would begin with reclaiming the life she'd once given away. One truth at a time. It didn't come to her all at once. The idea wasn't loud, wasn't cinematic. There was no moment of her slamming drawers or throwing wine bottles or screaming into a pillow. It arrived instead like a whisper in a quiet house. A gentle, deliberate voice that grew clearer the longer she sat in silence. He wants a dinner at Aria, she thought. Fine, he'll get one. But not the one he imagined. Eleanor stood and went to her laptop. The Aria website loaded in seconds, a sleek black and gold homepage boasting seasonal menus, curated wine pairings, and private booths for intimate occasions. She clicked the reservations tab. Friday night. 8:00 p.m. fully booked. She didn't panic. Instead, she called directly. Her voice calm. Controlled. Yes, I understand it's a busy night, but I was hoping to speak to the maitre d' about a specific seating request for a business dinner. A pause, then she was transferred. The maitre d' sounded pleasant, cheerful, even. Eleanor kept her tone crisp but friendly. There's a reservation under Nathan Brooks at 8:00 p.m. this Friday, she began. It's through his firm's corporate account. I'll be dining there as well that night and wondered if possible could I request a table near his. We may merge tables later in the evening depending on how our meetings go. The maitre d' didn't question it. Certainly, Dr. Brooks. We can accommodate that. Dr. Brooks. Funny how even now the title caught her off guard. She'd earned it long ago but rarely used it. She had always defaulted to Mrs. Brooks because Nathan once said introducing her as doctor made people think she was trying too hard. Her lips curled in a bitter smile. After securing the reservation, Eleanor sat back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. She felt no thrill, no satisfaction, just clarity. She wasn't planning a scene. She wasn't interested in public humiliation or dramatic ultimatums. No, this would be quiet. Controlled, measured. The truth served cold. And face to face. There was one other thing to do. She typed Daniel Carter's name into her university email system and began composing a message. It was almost too easy. Her credentials provided her the perfect cover. Subject: invitation to speak at our executive series on sustainable architecture. Dear Mr. Carter, I'm reaching out on behalf of the Business and Urban Planning Department at Holden University. We host a quarterly executive series where notable leaders in the field join us for discussion on innovation in architecture and sustainability. Your work at Carter Design Group has been frequently cited by our graduate students, and I believe your voice would be a valuable addition to our next session. Would you be open to discussing this opportunity over dinner? This Friday, I have a reservation at Aria at 8:00 p.m. and would be honored if you could join me. Warm regards, Dr. Eleanor Brooks. She read it over twice, added her university signature, and hit send. It was clinical, professional, unassuming. Exactly what she needed. She didn't know what Daniel was like. She didn't know what he suspected, if anything at all. But she knew what it felt like to be lied to. And she knew he deserved the truth as much as she did. The reply came just 2 hours later. Subject: Re-Executive Series Invitation. Dear Dr. Brooks, thank you for your kind invitation. I've admired Holden's work for years and would be delighted to meet you and discuss the program. Friday at 8:00 p.m. At Aria works perfectly. See you then, Daniel Carter. She closed her laptop, her hands resting lightly on the keyboard. It was done. The framework had been built. The pieces arranged. Now she only needed to wait. But the stillness brought back the ache. She got up and wandered to their bedroom, the one she and Nathan had shared for years. It was too tidy, like a showroom. Nothing personal anymore. The framed photos on the dresser, smiling vacations, holiday parties, suddenly looked staged. She walked to her closet and opened the doors. The red dress was still there, wrapped in dry cleaner's plastic. The one she had wanted to wear on her 40th birthday 2 years ago. She had planned a dinner with friends, even booked a table at a rooftop bar downtown. But Nathan had come home irritated that night, complaining of a migraine. He said the dress was too loud. It looks like you're trying to be 20 again, he muttered without looking up from his phone. She'd changed into something safer. Cancelled the dinner. Told her friends she caught a cold. It wasn't just birthdays, there were anniversaries forgotten. Moments dimmed. Conversations where her excitement was met with blank stares or distracted nods. The erosion hadn't happened overnight. It had been slow, gentle, like waves smoothing a jagged rock. But now there was nothing left to smooth. She pulled the red dress from the hanger, held it against her body. It still fit. She hung it on the back of the closet door and whispered, "Not trying to be 20, just trying to be seen." That night, as Nathan sat beside her on the couch, half watching a show while texting under the blanket, Eleanor sipped her tea and didn't say a word. He leaned over during a commercial break. "That presentation Friday night is going to be brutal," he said casually. "Big client. Merger talks." She looked at him and nodded. "Good luck." He smiled, relieved at her disinterest. "You're the best." Eleanor smiled too. But it didn't reach her eyes. She went to bed early and stared at the ceiling until long after the room went dark. In her mind, she walked through the steps again. The layout of the restaurant. The timing, the seating. The moment Sabrina would step into the private booth, never suspecting who sat just beyond the wine rack partition. The moment Nathan would raise a glass thinking he had both women fooled. And the moment when Truth would walk into the room on 4 legs and heels and polished leather shoes and quietly, irrevocably change everything. Arya glowed like a jewel box in the night. From the outside, its soft amber lights and marble columns whispered exclusivity. Inside, every detail was curated to soothe polished wood, hushed voices, waiters gliding like shadows, and tables tucked just far enough apart to invite privacy, while still leaving room for performance. Eleanor arrived 10 minutes early. The maitre d' recognized her immediately from their phone call and led her to her table just as promised, adjacent to a private booth half-shielded by frosted glass panels and trailing vines. "You'll find the view ideal," he said with a subtle smile. She nodded, returning his discretion with quiet gratitude. The seat gave her a perfect angle, close enough to observe but far enough not to be noticed immediately. She placed her bag beside her, adjusted her silverware, and ordered a glass of red wine. Her hand barely trembled. She felt ready. A strange calm had settled over her during the drive. No racing pulse, no inner monologue trying to rehearse what she would say. She didn't need to rehearse. The truth was the only script she required. At 7:47, Nathan arrived. He wore the charcoal gray suit she'd helped him pick for a promotion dinner 3 years ago. His tie was navy classic. His hair slicked back just the way he liked for important meetings. He looked polished, comfortable. The man he always became when he was trying to impress. He scanned the room, checked his watch, then nodded politely as he was led to the booth. From across the room, Eleanor studied him like a stranger. He looked younger than usual, lighter somehow. His face animated as he tapped at his phone, presumably sending a "just got here" text. At 7:56, Sabrina walked in. She was every bit the image Eleanor expected. Red dress fitted perfectly. Heels that clicked confidently. Hair soft and curled, styled to look undone. The kind of beauty that says, "I didn't try too hard, I just woke up like this." Nathan stood as she approached, his expression transforming into something Eleanor hadn't seen directed at her in years: joy. Pure, unfiltered joy. He took her hand and kissed her cheek. She laughed, lightly slid into the booth across from him, and leaned forward, already whispering something that made him smile wider. And just like that, Eleanor's marriage became a spectator sport. She watched them laugh over appetizers, toast with sparkling wine. Nathan reached across the table, once brushing a strand of hair from Sabrina's face with a tenderness that used to belong to Eleanor. A burn started at the back of her throat, but she swallowed it whole. She didn't need to feel pain tonight. That part had passed. At exactly 8:03, Daniel Carter arrived. He was taller in person, with a presence that radiated quiet steadiness. His salt and pepper hair was neatly styled, his suit well-fitted, but there was a tiredness behind his eyes, a weariness. Eleanor recognized instantly. He scanned the room, then caught sight of her and smiled politely. "Dr. Brooks?" he asked, as he reached the table. "Please," she said, rising to shake his hand. "Call me Eleanor." His handshake was warm, firm. "Thank you for inviting me," he said, taking his seat. "This place is something." She followed his gaze as it swept across the room just shy of the booth behind them. "We try to impress our guest speakers," she said lightly. "It's part of the university's charm offensive." He laughed. "Well, it's working." Their menus arrived. They placed orders. The conversation began with polite talk about sustainable housing, urban congestion, zoning regulations. Eleanor kept her voice steady, her eyes occasionally drifting to the booth behind the greenery. Nathan was now pouring wine. Sabrina leaned into his shoulder, her laugh too loud. Daniel didn't seem to notice. Yet. But fate, as always, enjoys theatrics. At 8:41, Sabrina excused herself for the restroom. She walked past Eleanor's table without noticing her at first, too absorbed in her own reflection in the mirrored columns. Eleanor watched her go. Waited. When Sabrina returned, their eyes met. Just for a moment. Recognition bloomed instantly in Sabrina's face. She froze mid-step. Eleanor rose slowly, meeting her halfway in the narrow aisle. "You're Nathan's wife," Sabrina said, voice low and uncertain. "And you're Daniel's Eleanor." replied her gaze, drifting toward the man now sipping a Cabernet and scanning the dessert menu. He's just over there. Sabrina turned, and Eleanor saw the exact moment the weight of it hit her. The color drained from her face. Her fingers clutched her clutch tighter. Please. Sabrina began, her voice shaking. Not here. Why not here? Eleanor asked, her tone level. It's lovely. Romantic lighting. Soft music. Candlelight. Seems appropriate, doesn't it? Sabrina blinked rapidly. I can explain, can you? Eleanor asked gently but firmly. Can you explain why you're holding hands with my husband in a booth paid for by our joint account? Can you explain why you're betraying a man who believes in you enough to tag you as his anchor in this stormy world? Sabrina's eyes filled. It's complicated. It always is, Eleanor said, but I've found that truth rarely is. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement Nathan had noticed. He was standing now, his face pale, confused. Eleanor, he said, approaching. What are you? I'd like you to meet someone, she interrupted, turning to Daniel, who was now rising from his seat, confusion blooming across his face. Daniel, she called softly. Come here for a moment. He came, brows furrowed. Eleanor placed a hand gently on his arm. This is my husband, Nathan Brooks, she said calmly. Nathan, this is Daniel Carter. Sabrina's husband. Silence fell like a curtain. Heavy. Complete. Daniel looked from Eleanor to Nathan, then to Sabrina. His mouth opened, but no words came. Sabrina looked down, mascara streaking slightly. Nathan stepped forward. This isn't what. No, Eleanor cut in. We're well past, this isn't what it looks like. Daniel stared at Sabrina, stunned. How long? Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Eleanor took a breath, turned to the hovering maitre d' and said with serene precision. Would it be possible to combine our tables? It seems we'll be having a conversation together tonight. The maitre d', bless him, didn't flinch. Of course, madam, he said. Right this way. The private dining room at Aria was tucked discreetly at the end of a polished hallway behind a frosted glass door that muffled the ambient sounds of clinking glassware and murmured conversations. The maitre d' led them wordlessly, his movements practiced and unfazed. He opened the door with a small bow and gestured them inside. Nathan followed behind Eleanor in stiff silence, Sabrina beside him like a shadow unraveling. Daniel walked a step behind, his eyes fixed ahead, refusing to glance at his wife. Inside the room was intimate but spacious, walls paneled in dark wood, a chandelier casting golden light over a round table, now set for four. The waiter entered, laid out fresh menus, poured water, and vanished without a word. For a long moment no one moved. Then Eleanor stepped forward and took a seat. Not across from Nathan, but next to Daniel. She unfolded her napkin, set it in her lap, and reached for her glass of water with elegant precision. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Nathan and Sabrina sat down across from them slowly, like they were waiting for the floor to give out. Eleanor was the first to speak. So she began, voice calm and even. Shall we begin? Nathan opened his mouth, but she raised a hand slightly, not unkindly, just firmly. I'm going to go first, she said, because I think we all deserve to hear the full truth. And I've taken great care to ensure I have it. She turned to Daniel briefly, then back to Nathan. This isn't a confrontation. I'm not interested in screaming or making a scene. This is simply a reckoning. Sabrina looked down, fingers twisting her napkin into knots. Nathan cleared his throat. Eleanor, I know how this looks, but I'm not interested in what it looks like, she said, cutting in gently. I'm interested in what it is. She reached into her purse, removed a slim leather folder, and placed it on the table. Inside was a stack of printed emails and screenshots neatly arranged and paper-clipped. The beachfront apartment in Charleston, she said, sliding the folder slightly toward Nathan. The one you told me your firm had looked into for retreats. Turns out the lease application was in both your names. She didn't raise her voice. Her tone was almost clinical. Nathan blinked. You went through my, yes, she said simply. 3 days ago. She turned to Sabrina. I also found the flight confirmation for Cabo next month. Booked as a conference trip, paid for with the same corporate card used to pay for dinner tonight. Sabrina swallowed, visibly trembling now. Eleanor, Nathan said, leaning forward, you're being "Don't," she said, still calm. "Don't tell me I'm being anything. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't called anyone names. I'm not being emotional. I'm being precise." Daniel still hadn't spoken. His eyes were on his wife, studying her with a painful stillness that said more than any words could. Eleanor continued. "For 15 years I played the part. I supported you. I moved when your job demanded it. I gave up my fellowship. I planned birthdays, anniversaries, networking dinners. I smiled when you needed me to, and I shrank when it made you more comfortable." Her voice wavered slightly, but only for a moment. "But tonight," she said, steadier again, "I'm done performing." Nathan stared at her. "You're being very calm about this." She laughed softly. "Not bitter, just tired. That's because I've already had my breakdown. I cried in a hotel room. I screamed into a pillow. I counted every lie I let you tell me and every truth I didn't want to see." Sabrina shifted in her seat, eyes now glistening. "You think this dinner is the worst part?" Eleanor asked. "It's not. The worst part was realizing I've been invisible in my own marriage for years." She looked at Daniel now. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." Daniel finally spoke. His voice was low, graveled. "How long?" Sabrina hesitated, then whispered. "Almost a year." He closed his eyes. Just for a second. Then nodded, as if filing that number away somewhere he wouldn't forget. "You lied to my face," he said. "Every night. You made me feel guilty for working late. For not being more present. But the whole time." His voice broke and he stopped. The room hung in silence again. Eleanor didn't fill it. She let it breathe. Then finally Nathan said, "I didn't mean for this to happen." Eleanor looked at him fully, now meeting his eyes. "You didn't mean to get caught," she said. "You meant every moment of it. Every dinner, every plan, every message that said, 'I wish she were more like you.'" She turned to Sabrina. "You thought you were just stealing a man, but what you really took was the illusion I had left." Sabrina wiped a tear from her cheek. "I never wanted to hurt you." "You didn't have to want it," Eleanor said. "You just had to not care enough to stop." The waiter knocked gently, stepped inside with a basket of bread, sensed the atmosphere, and retreated instantly. Eleanor sat back slightly, her body language still composed, still in control. "I didn't come here tonight to destroy anyone," she said, voice softer now. "I came to reclaim myself. To stop being the woman who excuses everything just to keep the peace." Nathan leaned forward, desperate. "We can fix this." "No," she said, almost kindly. "You can't fix something you don't even think you broke. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry it got inconvenient." Daniel stood. Slowly. "I can't eat," he said quietly. "I understand," Eleanor replied. He looked at Sabrina one last time. "I'll send someone for my things." She reached for him, but he stepped back and she let her hand fall. He left. The silence returned. Nathan reached out. "Eleanor, I..." She stood too, gathering her purse. "I'll be staying elsewhere tonight," she said. "You can use the house this weekend to collect whatever you need." He looked stunned. "You're just walking away?" "No," she said. "You walked away a long time ago. I'm just catching up." She moved toward the door, then paused, turning back just once. "Oh," she said. "Dinner's on the corporate card. I figured it's only fair you pay for your fantasy." Then she left, heels clicking softly down the polished hallway, the chandelier light dimming behind her. The lobby of the Grand Meridian Hotel shimmered with quiet elegance, clean marble lines, muted lighting, fresh lilies at the front desk. Eleanor stepped in her heels, muted against the thick carpet, her shoulders straight despite the weight of the evening. She didn't cry in the car. She didn't look back at the restaurant. She didn't call anyone. She simply handed her ID to the receptionist, confirmed her reservation, and accepted the key card with a calm smile that didn't match the storm churning beneath her skin. "Room 1904, the clerk said. "Top floor. City view." Eleanor nodded, thanked her, and took the elevator up in silence. The suite was immaculate: cream walls, navy accents, a king-size bed made with crisp white linens. A bottle of complimentary wine sat on the table with 2 glasses. She stared at it for a long time, then turned it around so she wouldn't see the label. The door clicked shut behind her. She locked it. For the first time in hours, she exhaled fully. She pulled off her earrings, placed them in the tray by the sink, and reached behind her to unzip the red dress. It fell around her feet like a curtain falling after a long performance. In the bathroom mirror, she caught her own reflection. No mascara streaks. No smeared lipstick. Just a woman staring back at herself. Not broken, not furious, just emptied. She changed into the soft hotel robe, curled her legs up on the armchair by the window, and looked out at the city skyline, lights blinking in quiet patterns like Morse code for a life she no longer belonged to. Then the knock came. She didn't move at first. Another knock, more urgent now. When she finally stood and checked the peephole, she wasn't surprised. Nathan. He stood there disheveled. No jacket, no tie. Eyes wide with panic. He looked like a man who had finally realized the damage he couldn't undo. Eleanor opened the door just an inch, the chain still secured. "What do you want, Nathan?" she asked, her voice soft. "We need to talk," he said, stepping closer. "Please, let me in." "Number." "I ended it," he said quickly. "With her. It's over." She looked at him unmoved. "Is that supposed to mean something? I'm sorry." "Eleanor, please don't do this. Let's go home and talk about this. Just you and me." She unlatched the chain, opened the door all the way, and stepped into the hallway, closing it behind her. She handed him a small envelope. Inside was a key. "This is your weekend," she said calmly. "Go home, pack what you need. I'll be back Monday. By then I expect you to be gone." Nathan stared at the envelope as if it were a foreign object in his hands. "You're not serious." "I've never been more serious," she replied. "I made a mistake." "No," she cut in. "You made a series of decisions. Repeated, sustained, intentional. A mistake is forgetting a dinner reservation. You made a double life. I thought we could fix this. We have 15 years. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw it. The distance. The absence. "You don't get it, do you?" she said. "I left you the day you started lying. You just didn't notice." Nathan opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I don't hate you," she added. "But I can't respect someone who asked for my loyalty while giving me their leftovers." He stepped forward. "Eleanor, please." She took a step back. "I'm done choosing you over me." And with that she turned and closed the door. This time the sound echoed. Inside, she stood frozen for a few seconds. Then slowly she walked to the bed, sat on the edge, and let her hands fall into her lap. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the tears came, not the kind born of fresh wounds, but the deeper, older kind. The kind that came from the death of a belief. She didn't cry for Nathan. She cried for the woman she had been. The woman who had once believed that love meant self-sacrifice. That being a good wife meant being small, accommodating, endlessly forgiving. That quiet suffering was a virtue. She cried for the years she had measured herself by his happiness. For every time she made herself smaller to fit the shape of his needs. And as she cried, something began to loosen in her chest, like an old knot finally unraveling. The tears didn't stop for a long time. But when they did, she felt lighter. Not healed, but lighter. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, arms crossed over her stomach. She realized in that quiet space that the hardest part wasn't losing Nathan. It was losing the illusion that he had ever truly seen her. That was the thing she'd been clinging to. That was what needed to go. And in its place, a strange kind of freedom began to grow, not jubilant, not exciting, but clean. A space cleared. A door closed. A new one still locked, still untried, waiting to be opened. She rose, poured a glass of water, and walked to the window. The city below shimmered on in ignorance. People dined, kissed, hailed cabs, texted lovers. The world hadn't changed. But she had. As she sipped her water, her eyes softened. The anger was gone. The ache still lingered, but it no longer consumed her. She was still standing. And maybe, just maybe, she was finally beginning to return to herself. The next morning, Eleanor woke to a soft knock on her hotel room door. It was still early. The light seeping through the curtains was pale and uncertain, the kind of light that made the world feel like it hadn't fully begun yet. She pulled on the hotel robe, still groggy from a night of restless dreams, and checked the peephole. Daniel. She hesitated, hand on the latch. He stood there in yesterday's clothes, hair slightly tousled, holding 2 paper cups of coffee and a small brown bag. She opened the door slowly. "I wasn't sure if you'd be up," he said quietly, offering a tentative smile. Or if this was crossing a line. She stepped aside, wordlessly letting him in. "No line," she said. "Not today." He walked in, not quite making eye contact. "I passed a bakery on the way here. They had croissants. Thought you might want something that didn't taste like hotel minibar sadness." She laughed, quiet, unexpected. It surprised even her. "Thank you," she said, taking one of the cups. They sat by the window, side by side, like old friends who didn't need to fill the air with chatter. The city stretched before them in soft gold and gray, alive and indifferent to their heartache. Daniel took a long sip of coffee before speaking. "I didn't sleep much," he said. "Me neither. After you left the restaurant," he continued, "I walked. For hours. No destination, just moved." Eleanor nodded. She understood that kind of motion. The kind that wasn't about going somewhere, just about not being still. He looked over at her, then his gaze steady but gentle. "How are you holding up?" She considered the question. The instinct to say "I'm fine" rose automatically but died before reaching her lips. "I don't know yet," she answered honestly. "But last night was the first time I stopped pretending." He exhaled like he'd been holding something inside too long. "It's strange," he said. "You spend years building something. A home, a rhythm, a partnership. And then you find out you weren't in the same story." "Not really." Eleanor looked at him, felt the truth of it settle between them. "We weren't wrong to trust them," she said. "We were wrong to believe trust guaranteed loyalty." He turned that over in his mind, then nodded. "But I don't regret loving her," he added quietly. "Even now, it hurts. But the love was real." "I know it was." Eleanor swallowed hard. "Me too." They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the world go by. It would have been easy to fill the moment with forced optimism. "We'll get through this, we'll be better off, they didn't deserve us." But neither of them reached for those platitudes. Instead, they sat with what was true. Eventually, Daniel stood and walked to the window. "You know what hurts most?" he asked, voice lower now. "It's not just the betrayal, it's realizing I didn't really see her. Not clearly, not for a long time." Eleanor joined him at the glass. "We only see what we want to see," she said. "I think we forgive the little signs because we're afraid of what they might mean. And because we want to believe the people we love are incapable of hurting us." She nodded. "That might be the most dangerous kind of love." He turned to face her, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two strangers. Two wounds. Two souls caught in the wreckage of someone else's choices. But beneath all that, two people beginning to breathe again. Daniel looked down at the croissants still untouched on the table and gave a small sheepish laugh. "I brought breakfast and haven't taken a bite." She smiled. "Me neither." They sat back down and began to eat. Not because they were hungry, but because it felt like a step towards something normal. And in the weeks that followed, there were more steps. It started with small things: text messages, checking in, links to articles, a shared disdain for pretentious wine pairings. They met for lunch once, then again. No pressure, no agenda. Just space to talk or not. Daniel never tried to fix her. And Eleanor never pretended to be okay when she wasn't. Sometimes they sat for an hour and said almost nothing, both reading or staring out the window. Other times they talked for hours about work, about childhood memories, about music, about what they missed that they couldn't even name. There was no flirtation, no tension, just ease, respect, peace. It wasn't a rebound, it wasn't romantic. It was something more rare, a safe place. One afternoon they met in the park. Autumn had just begun its quiet invasion. The trees were gilded and the breeze carried the scent of cinnamon from a nearby food truck. They sat on a bench with warm drinks in hand, watching a group of kids play tag on the grass. Daniel spoke first. "You know what I keep thinking," he said. "That this what we're doing, it's not about healing through someone else. It's about remembering who I was before her." Eleanor looked at him. "Exactly." She paused. "Being with you. It's the first time I've felt like myself in months. Maybe longer. He gave her a soft smile. Not because we're fixing each other. No, she said. Because we're not asking each other to be anything other than honest. They watched in silence again, letting that truth settle. Eventually Daniel stood. I should head back, but thank you, Eleanor. For what? For making all of this bearable. She looked up at him and nodded. You too. He walked off slowly, hands in his coat pockets. Eleanor sat for a moment longer, letting the breeze tangle her hair. She didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of it. She was finding her way forward, not through a new love, but through a friendship built on truth, and that she realized was more powerful than any revenge could ever be. 6 months later, Eleanor stood backstage, the wireless mic already clipped to her collar, her breath steady despite the pulse of anticipation humming beneath her skin. The TED Talk stage gleamed just a few feet away, sleek, modern, circular. Behind the black curtain, she smoothed the front of her navy blue blouse, the soft silk catching the light. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't rehearsing. She was ready. Her talk was titled, Resilience is a Reclamation. It wasn't about heartbreak. It wasn't even about betrayal. It was about what came after. The rising. A month earlier, she'd received the invitation from the university board interim chair of the economics department. A temporary role, they said, until the full vote in spring. She hadn't even hesitated. The same week, a former student now working in nonprofit leadership had recommended her for a TEDx event. They were curating a theme on rebuilding and inner strength. Would she be willing to speak? She'd said yes before she could talk herself out of it. Now, as she waited in the wings, the moderator's voice echoed from the stage. And today's final speaker has taught resilience not just in her lectures, but in her life. Applause swelled. Eleanor stepped out into the light. She began not with a definition, but with a question. What if the moment that breaks you is also the moment that reveals you? Her voice was steady, her tone warm but grounded. She spoke of how resilience wasn't always loud, that it didn't have to look like bold leaps or grand gestures. Sometimes it looked like getting out of bed, like facing your own reflection and choosing to stay. She told her story without names, without blame. She spoke of illusion of loss, not just of a person, but of a version of herself that had bent too long in the wrong direction. She spoke of reclaiming, of rebuilding. She spoke of quiet strength. When she finished, the room stood. The ovation wasn't roaring, it was reverent. Afterward, as she stepped off stage, the event coordinator pressed a hand to her heart and whispered, "You gave so many women permission to breathe." Eleanor just smiled. She hadn't come here for applause. She came because it was time. Time to own the woman she'd become. At the reception, the room buzzed with conversation, caterers weaving between guests with trays of wine and hors d'oeuvres, the smell of basil and citrus in the air. That's when she saw him. Across the room by the glass windows overlooking the city, Nathan, older, thinner. He stood beside the chancellor, likely there on some business council invite. But when he turned and saw her, the change in his expression was immediate. Regret. Recognition. Wonder. He approached slowly. "Eleanor," he said softly, as if the name itself now required reverence. "Nathan," she replied evenly. "You were incredible. I didn't know you were speaking tonight." "I was invited," she said with a slight smile. Life has a funny way of circling back. He looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in years. She wasn't the woman who once cried quietly at his indifference. She wasn't the wife waiting to be chosen. She was more herself than ever. "I'm happy for you," he said. "I know," she replied. He hesitated. I think about everything. About us. A lot." She nodded. "So do I, but not with sadness anymore, just clarity." Nathan's voice dipped lower. "I lost the best thing I ever had." Eleanor's eyes were kind but unwavering. "No, Nathan," she said gently. "You let go of the best thing you never bothered to see." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. She reached into her clutch and took out a small card, the event program, and signed it with a pen. "I'm okay now, thanks to you. E.B." She handed it to him with a nod and turned back to the crowd. He stood there, stunned, the card trembling in his fingers. Word had spread that Sabrina had taken a job out of state Arizona or maybe Colorado. Mutual friends said she left quietly. Said Nathan had tried to keep the connection going, but it dissolved quickly once the fantasy wore off, and the damage was undeniable. Eleanor didn't care much for the details, not out of bitterness, but because she had other things to think about now. Her lectures were fuller. Students lingered after class. She launched a podcast, small at first, but growing quickly, where she interviewed women across disciplines about strength, truth, and transitions. She started attending yoga again. She adopted a gray cat named Olive. And every so often, she'd meet Daniel for lunch, still friends, still allies in healing. He was writing again, something about architecture and memory, and she had agreed to edit his draft when it was ready. There was no rush to redefine their relationship. They both understood the rare gift they had already found. One night, Eleanor sat by her apartment window sipping tea and watching the city lights blink against the navy sky. She thought of the woman she used to be. How far she'd come. Not because someone saved her, but because she had chosen to stop shrinking. To stop justifying. To stop bleeding quietly in places no one noticed. She wasn't healed completely, but she was whole, and that she realized was better. She didn't need anyone to complete her, she had done that for herself. A year to the day. The leaves had returned to their full amber chorus, rustling in the early October wind like a soft applause from the trees lining the riverbank. Eleanor and Daniel strolled side by side along the edge of the water. The city pulsed quietly behind them, its rhythm no longer something they chased, but something they witnessed. They didn't speak much. They never had to. Sometimes healing didn't require dialogue, just presence. Eleanor wore a gray wool coat, scarf loose around her neck. Her hair was longer, now softer, untouched by the hurried fingers of a life lived for someone else. Daniel sipped from his to-go cup, glancing over as a group of joggers passed, their laughter echoing down the trail. "I made a reservation," Eleanor said, suddenly stopping near the railing to look out over the river. Daniel arched a brow. "Dinner?" She shook her head, smiling. "Not exactly." He waited, letting her unfold the thought in her own time. "1 year ago," she continued, "I sat in a restaurant at a table perfectly positioned to watch the man I married fall in love with someone else." Daniel didn't speak. He just listened. "I thought I'd never breathe again," she said. "But I did. And now, I've reserved a different table." He turned toward her fully now. "This time it's for me," she said. "Just me. No performance. No strategy. No audience." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding, flickering in his eyes. "You deserve that." She looked out over the river. "It's funny. I used to think the worst thing that could happen was being left. Turns out the worst thing was forgetting how to sit alone without feeling empty. And now," he asked gently, "now I sit with myself and I feel full." A beat of silence passed between them. "Not because I found someone else," she added, glancing at him with warmth, "but because I stopped searching for someone to complete me." Daniel smiled, slow and steady. "That's the strongest thing I've ever heard anyone say." She looked over at him. "You helped, you know. More than you realize." He looked almost embarrassed, chuckling. "All I did was show up. That's more than most." They resumed walking, the sound of their footsteps soft on the gravel path. As they reached the footbridge, Eleanor paused again. "You ever think," she said, "that maybe betrayal isn't the end of the story?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What is it then?" She turned to him, her gaze calm but unwavering. "A threshold." He let the word sink in. "A door you don't want to open," she said, "but once you do, you realize it was never about the people who hurt you. It was about who you become after you close it behind you." Daniel considered that. "So what's on the other side?" she smiled. "A life built with both hands," she said. "And no need to ask permission to take up space in it." The wind picked up slightly, tugging at her scarf. Daniel reached out instinctively to adjust it, then hesitated, respecting the boundary they had always honored. She adjusted it herself. They reached the cafe at the edge of the park. The host recognized her from past visits. "Table for one?" he asked, politely. Eleanor smiled. "Yes," she said. Then, after a pause, Actually make that too. For now. Daniel chuckled. Temporary +1, temporary witness, she corrected. They sat, but it wasn't like last year. There was no hiding, no pretending. Just two people sitting fully in themselves, sharing the kind of space that doesn't demand, doesn't take, just quietly holds. They sipped coffee and watched the river. And when the check came, Eleanor reached for it. My table, she said. My life. He raised his cup to her in a silent toast. To what, she asked. He smiled. To the woman who reserved her own seat. That night, Eleanor journaled by candlelight, writing, not to remember the pain but to witness the transformation. She wrote, I once thought revenge would heal me. It didn't. What healed me was walking through the fire. Not to burn him but to burn away everything I was not. She closed the journal and placed it on her nightstand. She didn't cry, she didn't sigh, she simply slept. Not because everything was perfect, but because finally it was hers. Her story. Her strength. Her table. And so if you're sitting alone right now wondering why they chose someone else, wondering why you weren't enough, remember this, sometimes the pain is not the ending. Sometimes it's just your beginning. A new chapter. A different table. Reserved in your name. You'll be